today we are jumping into Acts 17, and if you have been following along and tracking with us this past series, it's been powerful, and we love to take what happens here on Sundays and put it into the rest of our week. We want to take this moment and let it lead to movement in our lives. One of the best ways that you can be a part of that is to actually sign up for our future church devotional. Members of our team are creating this, actually people that don't even live in San Diego that serve and are servant leaders here in our church that live in other states are participating in such a cool way because this is a digital thing. And so even if you're watching online, you can dive in. If you want to text Future Church, all one word, to 94000, Future Church 94000. You can sign up for our devotional. You'll get it each week. We got 2 weeks left, but it's not too late to jump in and to let what we're going to hear about today go deeper in your life throughout the week. All right, so we've been journeying through the book of Acts, and it's the fifth book in what we call the New Testament, and it was written, at least the first half, most scholars believe, by a guy named Luke, and he was a researcher, a doctor. He really put together, his goal was to put together an account, a chronological account of what happened with the person of Jesus and what that did in the city of Jerusalem and the people that decided to follow him. And so this book kind of covers the 2 to 3 decades after Jesus' death and resurrection. And he puts together this idea of what happened to the first followers of Jesus. When they decided, hey, I'm going to follow the way and teaching of Jesus, here's what I'm going to do with my life. They had no playbook. They had no kind of set of instructions. And so while we have this for us now, as we're stepping into this new season as a church, we want to kind of take some inspiration from the first church because we might be making some things up on the fly as we go as well, because everything in our life, at least in mine, probably in yours as well, feels like at least it's been impacted or changed a little bit. All right, and so this is good news for us. And if you missed the last weeks of the series, if you're here for the first time, I would encourage you can go to our YouTube page and catch up on the series because we are moving chronologically through the book. So today, my hope is to give you a simple and usable tool for how we, those of us that are following Jesus, if you like to be a part of this, you can do it even if you're not following Jesus, but can share what we think or believe about God, what he's done in our life with other people, right? To put a churchy word on it, we're talking about evangelism today, all right? But don't let that trigger you, okay? And specifically, what does it look like for you and I? What does it look like for us to share what God has done with other people? What does it look like for you to share what God has done for you with someone who doesn't think like you? Right? How do you share what God has done for you with someone who doesn't think like you? We've all experienced this at some point in our life where we're like, man, I just don't want to talk about religion. I just want to talk about God. It feels like pressure-y. Maybe you've been on the other side of someone's very, pressure-filled discussion about God or things of faith, and you're like, I'm not interested in that, even though I might even theologically agree with some of the things you're saying. And it's not an accident. Like if you're around and you're paying attention, it is increasingly more antagonistic to talk about God and the teachings of Jesus. But what I want to offer you today, and what I hope we can see from the book of Acts, is not that the world changed dramatically in the first century because people had some kind of magic formula, and that now that doesn't work for our time, right? What happened in the book of Acts is actually the same thing that's going to enable our culture, our friends, our neighborhood to be able to be changed by the love of God. But it's not that our world now is so different, but it's that the church has chosen over time not to adapt to culture. The church has been notoriously slow, and I believe that the church needs a new approach. It's not a brand new approach. We're actually going to see it in the text of the scriptures from the first century, but it's something that we have lost along the way that the first followers of Jesus really took to heart about how it is to talk about what it is that Jesus had done in their life. And we're going to see it in the context of a conversation that a guy named Paul, who used to be Saul, if you were here a couple weeks ago, we talked about his experience with Jesus. He was Saul of Tarsus. He was a Jewish Pharisee. He was a leader in the Jewish religion that persecuted Jesus and the followers of Jesus. Then he met Jesus, and now he's using his Roman name, Paul, to get around the entire Mediterranean rim into other cities where people are beginning to hear about Jesus and little ecclesias, little church gatherings, not like this, but little like home groups of people saying, hey, have you heard about Jesus? Hey, have you heard about Jesus? Are starting to sprout up. And so he's traveling around. And so we're in Acts 17 today. And so if you have a copy of the Bible, you can turn there. If you're watching online, you can go to another tab. If you want to go there on your phone. If you're here in the building, we have a Bible in the seat back pocket directly in front of you. You can grab this and turn to Acts chapter 17. Acts 17 is on page 666, and it is Halloween, so let's get into it. All right. Don't be scared. All right, so here's what's happening. Paul has, again, traveled all around the Mediterranean rim, far now away from Jerusalem, which is his hometown, into spaces where there weren't a ton of Jewish people anymore. And so he's talking about Jesus into a new context. And we're going to learn and watch how he demonstrates to engage with a culture that's different than his. So starting in Acts 17, verse 16, it says this: while Paul was waiting for them in Athens, he was deeply troubled by all the idols that he saw everywhere in the city. And so he went to the synagogue, which was his normal thing, to reason with the Jews and the God-fearing Gentiles. And he also spoke daily in the public square to all who happened to be there. Now, this was not, a bullhorn preacher situation, right? You've seen those. This is not actually what that was, because we're going to see in just a second what happened, right? He was there and had a debate with some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers, and he told them about Jesus and his resurrection. They were like, what is this babbler saying about these new, strange ideas he's picked up? So that gives us a clue. This was new information for them. They had not heard about Jesus yet. And others said he seeseems to be preaching about some foreign god. And so they take him to the high council of the city, right, kind of the Supreme Court of Athens, who were at that time very, philosophy-oriented, theology-oriented. And it says, come, tell us about this new teaching, they said. You are saying some really strange things, and we want to know what it's all about. And here's where Luke gives us context as to why this wasn't necessarily offensive to them. It says it should be explained. I love his context. He jumps up to 100,000 feet and says, all the Athenians, as well as foreigners that came to Athens, seemed to spend all their time discussing the latest ideas, right? So Athens was a city where people loved to show up. People would travel there so that they could hear weird, new, cool, edgy theology and philosophy thoughts, right? So Paul actually fit right in. So this was not new for their context, but what he was talking about felt very new to them. And so Paul, it says, standing before the council, addressed them as follows. Now watch what he does. This is masterful. It says, men of Athens, because at the time it was probably all men, I noticed that you are very religious in every way. For as I was walking along, I saw your many shrines. And one of your altars had this inscription on it: to an unknown God. This God, who you worship without knowing, is the one that I'm here to tell you about. I mean, look at that, right? He takes in what he's seeing in culture. He takes in what he's seeing in this new city, and he says, you actually already are interested in this thing I'm about to tell you, right? So we're going to walk through what he does here in just a second, but this is powerful. He continues to go on. This God that you've, unknowingly worshiped as the unknown God, I'm here to tell you about him. He is the God who has made the world and everything in it. And since he is the Lord of heaven and earth, he does not live in man-made temples, and human hands cannot serve his needs, for he has no needs. He himself is the one that gives breath and life and gives it to everyone, and he satisfies every need. For through one man, he created all of the nations throughout the whole earth. He decided beforehand where they should rise and fall, and he has determined the boundaries that they should set. His purpose, this is huge, for all nations was to seek after God and perhaps feel their way towards him and find him. Right? He describes this idea that many of us have perhaps felt like you're kind of walking through a dark room just trying to find where God is. You ever felt that way? I know I have. Where is God in the situation? Over these last 2 years, God, where are you, right? He says this was actually God's hope, is that as we're doing that heart posture of seeking where is God, that we would find him, though he is not far off from any of us. For in him we live and move and exist. For some of your own poets, he says it. Then he quotes their, top 40 song. He says, we are actually his offspring. And since this is true, we shouldn't think of God as an idol designed by craftsmen, made from gold or silver or stone. Mic drop, right? This is Paul's experience where he's talking to these people. And as we're looking at this story, I think it's so powerful. We can just read that as a cool, story from history. It's like, oh, that's interesting. Like, it probably wouldn't have survived. This wasn't actually true. There's a lot of Greek literature. It's one of the most wealthy places at that time in the world. They took a lot of notes, a lot of history. If someone was in front of their, Epicurean, leaders in that city, that would have been noted. But we have to look at, what is Paul doing here? Is there a pattern? Is there something that he's wanting, perhaps God's wanting us to notice about how Paul goes about it? Because this situation is pretty unique, right? You're probably never going to be in that same situation. I'm not either. But we are going to be in a situation this week, I guarantee you, if you're open to the opportunity, where God is going to put you in front of someone who has a need, who has a question, who has been searching for God over these last 18 months, perhaps in a new way, maybe just like you have. And what we can learn, what we can glean from how Paul goes through this is super important, all right? And so what we're going to learn from here, if you want to engage in culture and the people around us, we have to first be quick to understand the spiritual landscape that we're walking into. Now, Paul wasn't just going into a new city. He was like, oh, this is awesome. I love the architecture. I love seeing what's going on. Where are we going to eat? I'm sure they have good Greek food here in Athens, right? Like, he was paying attention to the undercurrent, the underlying needs of the people around him. And I think for so many of us, we have to start there where we ask the question, is there space in my heart and my mind to pay attention, to listen, to kind of gauge the spiritual landscape of the people around me? Or am I too stressed out, so busy that I'm really only focused on myself? What my schedule is, what I need to get done today, what I want to do when I show up at this place. And if we're honest, it has to start where we ask the question, do I see other people as an inhibitor to my agenda? Or are they perhaps people that God has sent me to love, to care about, and to see? Right? It's this question really that comes down to, do you see people with a sense of compassion or a sense of contempt? Those can feel heavy. But the first question we have to have, the first thing we have to have if we're going to really engage culture is we have to have compassion, right? Is my heart open? Perhaps is my heart even broken open by seeing the idols that exist in our culture? And that feels like a weird word. We don't use that a lot. But let's be honest, idols of success, idols of fame, idols of the right body shape or the right waist size, idols of the right car to drive or the good grades your kids are going to get, all fine things, but those are running rampant in our culture. Idols of convenience, idols of getting my needs met, idols of addictions and coping mechanisms that we've all adopted perhaps over these last 18 months in isolation. Like, there are things that all of us in our life put ahead of God. And the Bible calls those idols. Now, we don't make them out of stone or gold or silver. They're just secretive. Or they live in our pocket. And we don't know what to do with them because it's easy to hide them away. And it's easy for your neighbors and your friends and your coworkers to hide them away. But does your heart break? Does my heart break? Is there compassion? Because if we don't have compassion, we won't go to the next step. It has to start there. When we look around the world, when we see people in our neighborhood or at our place of business, at your gym, do you honestly show up and say, hey, I want to have compassion today, God. I want to have compassion for these people. Even if they disagree with me about money or politics or religion, I want to have compassion. And for many of us, right, if we don't have compassion, maybe you've been in contexts like this or even churches like this, we will choose to stay isolated on the sidelines and actually feel good about it. That for many of us, maybe you grew up in a church or experienced a church that would never engage culture. They just liked staying on the side, judging it. And it's because they had contempt instead of compassion. But the future church, a church that's invested in culture, always starts with compassion. What breaks your heart? The second thing I love that Paul did is that he went straight to the synagogue to teach, right, which was his go-to. Again, he was a Jewish leader. And so he shows up to a synagogue. It's not like, oh, I wonder what's going on today. They're like, oh, you're here. Why don't you teach? And he could definitely do that, right? That was kind of his situation. But, they knew his credentials. But then he also went from the synagogue and he went to the city square, which again was very common in Athens. That was where kind of the real life stuff was happening. And he was well-versed both in the Hebrew scriptures, what we call our Old Testament, that he could talk in the synagogues, and in what the culture was already discussing, so he could hold it down and build a bridge in the city square as well. And so he goes to the synagogue, and then he goes to the marketplace. And I love it that Paul doesn't see this as an either or, right? Either you can talk church with church people, or you can talk marketplace with marketplace people. And he says both, right? Either you can deal with Christians, or you can be real, but you can't do both, was the thought process. And Paul says, no, actually, you can do both, and you must do both. Right? Watch me work, he says. Right? If you want to be a part of the future church, you have to be able to speak both church and marketplace. I know there's so many of you, so many people I meet that they're crushing it at work. They're great at their job, But if they were honest, they're like, I don't really know a lot about Jesus or the Bible, and I definitely don't feel comfortable like talking to someone about how to love and follow Jesus, or even why I love and follow Jesus. And the challenge for us today as we want to move here, right, is great. You know a lot about distribution patterns or technology or market conditions. I know you're crushing it over there, but can you share what God has done in your soul as well? Are you spending as much time to practice that as you are your job, right? And then there's many of us as well that conversely, we're really comfortable in church world. I mean, it's just another podcast. What book are you reading? You know, like you can talk church all day long, but you don't know how to have a conversation with people that don't believe what you believe. That's really a struggle for you. And for all of us, right, there's a growth here for all of us, right, is that we don't need to like feel embarrassed in that, but God might be inviting us as we read this passage to step into a different life where we are fluent in both places if we want to be effective as the future church. We are fluent both with church stuff and with the marketplace. We know how to talk about God, and we know how to talk to people who don't believe in God about what he's done in our life and not make it weird, right? So as we build our understanding of what God is doing, right, we begin to see ourselves as sent, right? You are sent to that hospital. You're sent to that workplace. You're sent to that classroom. You're sent on your campus. You are positioned in your neighborhood on purpose, for a purpose by God. And so when Paul's in Athens, he's figured that out, and now he starts by saying, when he's given this opportunity to talk to some very influential people, notice the first thing that he does. And I think this is so important because we can easily miss that. If we want to invest in culture, it starts with compassion internally, but then the first thing out of our mouth, the first thing publicly that should happen is that we should compliment other people. Now that sounds super shallow, but let me show you, right? He says, men of Athens, I see that you are very religious, to which they're like, absolutely. Absolutely we are. You got that right. Like to us, being called very religious might not feel like a positive description today, but in first century Athens, that was their chief goal, right? That was high praise. And if you're here and you're not a follower of Jesus, you're watching online later, this is what I wish your experience with church people would have been like. If I'm your friend, I want you to know that I honor your search for God or meaning or purpose or whatever you might call it, whatever it looks like, wherever you are on your spiritual journey. I want you to know I don't judge you. And I don't think your journey has to look exactly like mine. But I can see your effort. I can see your desire. That there's something good that we have to get good at finding in other people. Because this is true, no matter where you are on the spiritual spectrum, no matter what you believe about God, all of us, we gravitate towards places where people compliment us. It's true. Some of you have left relationships or jobs or neighborhoods because they just didn't tell you nice things, right? And it feels so simple. So simple. And again, this isn't the last step, but it's got to be the first. Do we speak with love and kindness to people? Are we willing to maybe take our perspective off to the side just a little bit in order to actually see and look at others and say, hey, I see something good in you. I see something good in your pursuit of God, even though you aren't where I am, right? Because I think I've met people all the time who they've given up on church because their experience with church people went something like, oh, they know all the big theological words, and they definitely know what they think I should be doing, right? But I never really felt a whole lot of love off of them. And wasn't that the thing Jesus said was most important? And in those conversations, I'm like, yeah, like I'm out. I agree with you, right? And I know it's easy to think like, oh, it's hard to understand that church people can be real. Like once you follow Jesus, everything's hunky-dory and fine. I have no more problems. And then you're like, that you just can't hold up that facade much longer. And then you come here and you're like, whoa, like pastor's real here. Like it wasn't prepared for that, you know, like, and that's part of it, right? We have to understand, at least here, like there is nothing further from the truth. We are all on the same journey. The only difference might be that some of us, like the Apostle Paul, on his journey to Damascus, we just met Jesus. And that was the most important thing that ever happened to us. And it changed our life. It didn't fix everything overnight, and it certainly didn't make me better than you. But we just found that meeting him was the most powerful thing that's ever happened to me. And everything else about that moment, like getting to it, leading from it, like I'm just like you, but Jesus has done something. And this is what Paul says. He says, hey, you know, I see your pursuit for God. I see your pursuit for God. You even have you're very religious people. You have thousands of idols. I mean, you are killing it in the shrine game right now in Athens. But you even have one that's like to an unknown God because you just want to cover your bases. I love that. Like, hey, just in case we missed all of them, we got a lot, but just in case, unknown God, right? Like, unfortunately, that one probably didn't get a lot of sacrifices, but it's just there just in case. And Paul says, hey, I see that your pursuit is good, your desire to understand the things of God. That's admirable. He compliments them. And then he says, that unknown God, that one that maybe you just kind of left out or was there for safety, or maybe for some of you, you kind of done the rounds and then you get to the altar of the unknown God and you're like, just in case, I got to do this because this doesn't seem to be working over here. My crops aren't coming in. My marriage isn't good. Like, business is tough, but maybe the unknown God's got something for me. And he says that unknown God, the one that you actually worship without knowing, I'm actually here to introduce you. I mean, he builds common ground. And notice he doesn't say, how dare you for having an idol? How could you? He says, no. Good for you for having an idol to an unknown God. I'm just here to tell you who he is. I'm just here to tell you this thing that you already want to know. I'm just here to tell you about him, right? What do you think their posture was, right, when Paul said that? Were they sitting back, crossing their arms, or were they kind of leaning forward on the edge of their like marble slab bench or whatever, right? I mean, I think they were interested. They're like, whoa, you see us. And you have something to say? Like, let's go. Like, go ahead. He builds this connection with what it is that they already are talking about. And that's the fourth step, right? We have compassion, we compliment, we find common ground. There's people in our life that you have to be able to say, hey, we're a lot alike, actually. There's less that separates us than pulls us together. And then you find a connection. What is something happening in your neighbor's life or your friend's life or your teammate's life or your coworker's life right now that God says something about? That God's actually already on the move perhaps in their life and they don't even know it. If you have a neighbor that says, man, it's just been really hard to connect. I moved to San Diego in the last year. I mean, moved to a new city in the middle of a pandemic. Talk about a bad situation for building friendships. You hear someone say that, God says a lot about that. Love your neighbor as yourself is kind of one of the big ones, right? And you can engage with that person. Man, our marriage has been really struggling. Like, we've had too much time together, you know what I mean? Like, and you have a neighbor that shares that with you, and you're like, I understand. Our marriage isn't perfect either. Right? Just because I go to church doesn't mean everything's fine. Like, we have real struggles too. You build that connection point. Man, my kids, they feel behind in school and they don't know what to do and everything's so intense. They don't feel safe or maybe they don't feel safe because they're being too safe. I don't know what it might be for you. And you can just engage with another parent. You can share something of your own life that's been difficult even. And God can use that in someone else's story. Something that was hard for you or painful for you. And you wish you hadn't gone through it. God doesn't take that away because maybe he's waiting for you to use that to connect with someone else who might be in it right now. And you build this connection. We have compassion. We compliment. We find common ground. We name that we're more alike than we are distinct in our pursuit of God. And then we find a connection. Where's God in your friend's life? Even though they wouldn't call it that. Even though they wouldn't put language to it. Even though you can't talk about it at school or at the office. You can find that God is actually all in the mix already. And when we begin to see our world and see our relationships with those kind of lenses, the way the Apostle Paul did, we're able to find those connection points so much easier. Because really, when we follow Jesus, that is what love compels us to do, right? Love does not do so well in an isolated chamber of my life. Love is best shared, right? It compels us to give it away. And that's the question we have to ask, right? Is I think for many of us, while well-intentioned, our limits or perhaps the reason we don't fully engage with people around us is because we haven't actually fully come to grasp, or maybe we've forgotten what Jesus has done in our life. That Jesus has actually saved us from ourselves. And when we do that, when we recognize and remember what God has done in our life, it becomes so much easier to want to share that with other people, again, in a healthy and normal way. Right? You probably had those moments where you're so overwhelmed with something. You love this thing so much you had to tell someone about it. I remember the first time someone invited us to go to the restaurant Campfire in Carlsbad, and after I went, I was just like, oh my gosh, everyone I know needs to know. Just not on the days that I'm trying to get a reservation, right? So unpaid promotion for Campfire in Carlsbad. But it's just like, oh my gosh, like this is one of the best meals I've ever had in my life. And we used to live, 3 blocks from Restaurant Row in Chicago, where there was multiple James Beard Award winners. This is an incredible, incredible meal. It was so much fun. And it was so easy for me to talk about that. It was so easy for me to talk about this sports team that I love, which we're running short on here in San Diego. But, right? Or how much I hate the Astros, and so go Braves, that's fine. Whatever it might be, right? No offense if you're a Houston fan, right? We love you. There are things in our life that, if we're honest, we're already really good evangelists about. We live in San Diego. Our sunsets are great almost every day, but still, check out the sunset, right? No filter, right? We love to share things that we love. And so for some of us, if I'm honest and I can push you a little bit, if your story is like me and you kind of grew up going to church, that there might be an invitation from God to actually step back and remember, because it's just gotten so familiar, it's so habitual, which isn't a bad thing, but it becomes easy to forget how good Jesus has been to you. And that's so important, because if we don't have that locked into our life, this next step can get really scary, right? But when we lose our why, we actually lose our way. When you lose the why, you can lose the way. If you lose the why am I trying to build this bridge? If it becomes selfish, if it becomes, I'm just trying to fit in, then all of a sudden a little shift can take you in a totally different direction. And those aren't bad. It's happened to me before, right? But when we remember, hey, what I'm sent here to do, that if I'm a follower of Jesus, part of the invitation is to actually get on the field. Thank you, Ted Lasso, right? That there is no sidelines when it comes to following Jesus. And the first churches understood that wherever they went, they saw themselves as sent. And unfortunately, in our country, in the West, the church has gathered enough power that we don't feel like we are on the sidelines. And yet these people in the first century, they understood, hey, Jesus has done something so powerful in my life, I am compelled to share it. And when he enabled this conversation, when he navigated this cultural conversation with people he didn't understand, people he didn't necessarily agree with, when he engaged in that in a culture other than his own, it's so important we understand. He wasn't adopting it. He was adapting to it. He would write later in a letter to another church, I try to become all things to all people so that I might reach some, right? That the future church is nimble enough to adapt to whatever culture sends our way. We're not standing back, criticizing it, isolating from it, saying, well, you can go to hell, right? No, Paul says we have to step in and say we are adapting to our culture. And let me be honest with you. Religious people do not like church people, Jesus followers, that adapt to culture. You felt that. I've felt that. This isn't my idea. This is Paul's idea. This is Jesus' idea. The fact that Jesus came to earth shows us that God says, actually, go to places that are not like you. Engage with people who don't yet know what you know. The incarnation of Jesus is the loud megaphone saying you have permission to connect with cultures other than you. I don't just mean ethnic cultures or socioeconomic cultures, but you have multiple cultures in your workplace, in your home even, in your neighborhood, right? People that think a certain way, that they make decisions the way that they do because of things that they believe. And this is what God is inviting us as the future church to be a part of, is to invest in and engage with those people. But at the end of the day, if you don't take the fifth step, it never kind of turns the full corner. And the fifth step is to take a chance. So where's the opportunity? To actually look for it. At the end of the day, I need to take a chance and to say that the one who changed my life was Jesus. It's not church. I wasn't just going to a thing. I'm not just growing spiritually right now, right? At some point, I actually have to say, Jesus has changed my heart. Jesus who empowered me to help me get through that addiction. Jesus is who healed and restored our marriage. It's not religion. It's not church. It's not the universe. It's Jesus. You have to take a chance. You have compassion. You compliment. You find common ground and build a connection. And at the end of the day, you have to give them a chance to know what you know. You have to give them an opportunity. There's so many times in my life where I've left conversations where I'm like, oh God, that was an opportunity, and I missed it. There was an opportunity God was giving me to give someone an opportunity to hear about who Jesus was. Not in a preaching sort of way, but to just share what he's done in my life. And I got scared, or I backed up. And I think that's so normal, but I think it's so important that what the Apostle Paul says when he gives them a chance that this is actually who that God is, that unknown God. It's actually the creator of heaven and earth. He quotes their own musician, their own poet. Says, you already get this. This is why I'm here to tell you this. You actually already understand this. You may not have put these words to it. And then he says this thing that I hope is a game changer for you and for me if we actually grab a hold of this. And this is what the text says, that he's closer than we might think. He's actually not far from any of us. We love to set up idols in our life and to focus on these things because that keeps God at a distance. But Paul says actually, he's closer than you might think. His whole plan all along, and he gives us space and patience for it, that we would search for him in whatever way that looks. But at the end of the day, we got to understand he's closer than we might think. But do we believe that? Like, do you believe that for yourself? Do I believe that my neighbor, my family members, the people that I hang around with, the people that I see in life, do I believe that they are closer to Jesus than perhaps they even think that they are? Because if I do, it'll change how I engage with them. You know, I've talked with a lot of people, and obviously I'm a professional Jesus person, right? But so it really is hard to start a normal conversation sometimes. What do you do for work? TED Talks. They're just not good. They haven't gone viral yet. No, just kidding. That if I believe this text, right, it moves me from just getting them interested in my thing to actually being genuinely interested in their life. And when that happens, when people have that experience for me, it actually begins to change things. And I have these conversations all the time, and they might say, oh, I don't care about that. Really? You believe in Jesus? Like, I thought we got past that 30 years ago. You know, or, oh, I left the church a long time ago, and I don't plan on going back to those doors anytime soon. And here's what I believe in those moments is I believe that they believe that. I believe that they're being truthful. And yet if I can see this pattern, to say, I want to honor your journey, I want to speak a compliment into what you're trying to figure out, find commonality, build a connection, but then to also take a chance and say, I believe that you believe all those things, and I know that those experiences are real, and if I've had the same experience that you've had, I probably would think the same way you do. I get that. But I also believe if you're like many people that I meet, at some point in your life, you have found yourself struggling. You have found yourself wanting, even though you've tried every single thing that all of your friends have encouraged you to do and told you that they were going to solve your problem, but nothing's worked yet. And I get it. I'm not asking you to go back to your religion of your childhood if that's not helpful for you. But what I am saying is that perhaps you need to remember that you are a candidate for God to do something supernatural in your life, to bring peace of mind and wholeness of heart and forgiveness and healing into your life. And you may have counted yourself out, but I'm here to tell you God is closer than you think. Closer than you think, because it is in him that we live and move and have our being. And so I want to ask you, right? Like, do you believe that about the people around you? You don't have to answer out loud, but to really think about it. Do you believe that about the people that are around you? Because if you do, you're going to take a chance. You're going to lean into the conversation. You're going to linger a little bit longer when they're telling you about what's going on in their life. You're going to pray a little bit harder. You're going to be willing to walk with them a little bit further. Because, friends, I want to stay convinced. I want us to stay convinced that the people in our life are closer than they even think they are, and that God is closer to them than they think. And that when we do that, we can ask, we can lean in, we can offer them the chance, the opportunity, and then we can wholeheartedly leave the results to God. But I don't want to miss the opportunity to give God a chance to move in someone's life. And I love that when the Apostle Paul gives this message, talks about Jesus being raised from the dead. Again, some of the Epicurean and Stoic philosophers that did not believe in the resurrection, it says they sneered. And sometimes, friends, that's going to happen when we take a chance on people. They're going to reject it. They're going to reject us, and it feels vulnerable. I get that. But it also says that some wanted to hear more. And it says that a few gave their lives to Jesus and asked Paul how to live in this way of Jesus. And that one of them actually became the founder of the church in Athens. And so you and I, we have to understand, if we're going to view people around us with the compassion of God, we never know who God has marked their life already and is just waiting for us to give them an invitation. There's a story I love that I read every Easter before our Easter gathering in my kind of prep time. And it's about this usher that was sitting in a church in North Carolina, and two young teenagers came in. And they were kind of loud and a little bit disruptive. And he had a seat at the end of the row, because that's how their kind of more traditional church was set up. And he got up from his seat and stood the rest of the service so that these two teenage boys could sit down. One of those teenage boys, I don't know his name, but the other's name was William Graham. And he grew up to be Billy Graham, who we've probably all heard of, who literally changed the world. But we don't know this usher's name. Nobody cares. And my challenge for us is that we don't know who God's putting us in front of. We don't know the opportunity that God is placing before us. But when we realize that every person is an opportunity, every person you come in contact with has an opportunity, because heaven celebrates even if one person decides to follow Jesus, is what the scriptures teach us, right? That we will not stop praying, believing, reaching out. And so here's my challenge for us, right? When we ask that question, what would have happened if Paul had stayed isolated from culture instead of engaging in it, right? If we want to see that kind of change in our city, in our neighborhood, if you want your coworker to find a new direction, if you want your friend to find hope again, if you want restoration in that relationship with your wayward teenager, if you want to see our city be restored, we can't stop investing. We can't stop praying. We can't stop offering a chance. We can't stop, because the future church is invested in, not isolated from, the culture it's called to. The future church is invested in, not isolated from, the culture it is called to. It is well past time for the church to step back into the center of the marketplace. It's well past time for you and I to see our opportunities in front of us, to step into them and say, I'm not going to isolate myself from, I'm not going to be satisfied with my little holy huddle. I want to lean into what God is perhaps already doing in unknown places in my life. Do you see your job, your coworkers, your neighborhood as a people that you are sent to engage with them perhaps in this way, to have compassion, to find a way to compliment them, to honor what's good, to find common ground, commonality, and to build a connection to where God is already at work in their life? And then will you take a chance and give them the opportunity to know who Jesus is? So practically, there's a couple ways that this could look this week, and I want to encourage you to take a step. You may write these down in your journal and figure out which one is best for you. But maybe for you, it's just simply starting by maybe doing a prayer walk this week. Maybe you run in your neighborhood in the morning, exercise, or you take a walk with your spouse or walk the dog, or whatever it might be, spouse or dog, or both. Don't read into that. However it is you do, maybe in your neighborhood, you take that time instead of to listen to a podcast about business or just to catch up. Maybe you intentionally prayer walk your neighborhood. God, help me to see my neighbors the way you do. And maybe before you get out of your car, if you are going to your office still for work, or before you log in, and I know you're frustrated and it's Monday, you're like, I'm over the Zoom room or whatever it might be. But hey, take a 5-minute prayer break and say, hey, God, I'm going to sit still. Would you just help me see my coworkers with your eyes today? Maybe for some of you, you need to read a book that helps you have a conversation with someone that you care about. You need to up your marketplace street cred. You read a book that helps connect what God is doing with their life. I love that the Mom Tribe is going through Atomic Habits right now. It's like, well, is that a Christian book? Well, not really, but it's got a lot of Jesus in it. Because when we fill out these habits in our life to move towards our future, God honors that, right? So maybe you need to do that. Maybe for some of you, you need to take the risk and take the step to actually serve with the next generation. That we love what God is doing in Restoration Kids and Restoration students, and they need more leaders right now. Every week we've had Restoration students, which we don't have it tonight, FYI, happy Halloween, right? But every week that we've had Restoration students, we've had more and more students show up. And they need other adults in their life besides their parent, encouraging them, telling them that God believes in them. That God's not waiting for what they're going to do when they grow up, but that God can use them now. So whether that's nursery or elementary school, preschool, or teenagers, maybe you want to sign up and be a part of what God is doing here at Restoration Church in the next generation. You can fill that out on the back of the What's Next card that Kev Lasso mentioned earlier. So let us know you want to serve. Let us know you want to be a part of what God's doing in those environments. We could use you. And it will bless you like you would not believe. To see them have a light bulb moment, to see them get it, but to invest in them, to complement what they're doing. I also just want to take a moment, this was heavy on my heart this week, to honor those of you that are here, that you would fall into the boomer generation. And yet you're here. And perhaps you grew up in a more liturgical church, or that, there are things about who we are that maybe wouldn't be your preference, but you're here, and you're serving, and you're giving. And I just want to say thank you. Thank you for being a part of what God's doing. It might not have been your preference. And you've had to do this, maybe even without having words for it. You've had to adapt a little bit. But you celebrate that you're seeing new people come in, and young families grow up with this foundation of faith. And many of you are serving with our kids and students. And I just want to say thank you. So whether you're here in the room or you're watching online, thank you for being a part of what God is doing. And last thing, I promise I'm done. For some of you here today, or maybe you're watching online, I'd be remiss to not take the opportunity to say to you what Paul said to those people in Athens, that perhaps you've been searching. Perhaps you've been unknowingly worshiping an unknown God. Because you feel that gap, you feel that ache in your heart. And I'm here, and I'm believing that I have been sent this morning, in person, online, or watching later in the sound of my voice, to introduce you to him. That while you've been searching, and maybe life's been hard, maybe it's a painful thing in your story that's led you to come to church, or just tune in again. Maybe it's a relational stress, or financial stress, or maybe it's just you've kind of given up on the church thing because someone said something that hurt you when you were younger. I just want to tell you, I get all that. I really do. And there's not a facade you got to put on, or a mask that you got to wear to be acceptable to God. You can come just as you are. That in fact, as you're feeling your way seemingly blindly in the dark through life, God is closer than you even believe. And that you are more of a candidate for transformation than perhaps you'd even tell yourself. And so if you're here today, I just want to tell you, you've been searching, You think you got to work your way to find God? He's far off. I'm here to tell you he's not. He's not far. In fact, he's right here. And his name's Jesus. And he did everything that he needed to do to get to you. And so if that's where you're at this morning, if that's what's feeling in your heart, maybe you've been coming to church and checking it out, but you've never decided, hey, I want to follow Jesus. I'm going to give you an opportunity to do that in a few seconds. Maybe you grew up in church and you kind of feel like, oh, I did that as I was a kid, but your life is stuck and it hasn't changed. And you're like, I need to come back to the one who's never left me. This is for you too. And so I'll just invite you to close your eyes a little bit. We take a posture of prayer around here all the time where our hands are open. Maybe you were taught to pray with your hands closed. That was really just so you wouldn't like poke your neighbor as a kid, right? So don't poke your neighbor as an adult. But we open our hands to say, God, I'm open to what it is that you want to do. And if you're here and you are a follower of Jesus, I would encourage you to be praying for those that might be in this room or watching online that are about to become one. But as we open our hands, we can simply say, God, sometimes it doesn't feel like I have a lot to offer you. And I've been searching and it's been confusing. But if this is true, that you're not far, that you're actually right here, then I want to say yes. I want to receive what you have for me. And so if that's you this morning, whether for the first time or you're coming back to God, I would just invite you to simply repeat these words in the quietness of your own soul. There's nothing magical about them. It's just a way for us to say yes to what Jesus has already done, to what the yes that he gave for you. We just respond with a yes of our own and say, God, I have been searching. And it has not gotten me where I want to go. And so Jesus, today I say yes to you. Or today I come back to you. And rather than running after things that are not you, or even worshiping you as an unknown God, today I want to know your name. Because I believe that you know mine. And in spite of all the things I've done that give you reason not to love me, you say you still do. And so today I say yes to you. Amen. Amen. And if you prayed that today, I just want you to know that like this offer that Paul gave in Acts 17, the reality is that in him and through him you live and breathe and have all things of life. And so this isn't the end of your journey, this is just the beginning of it. But we would love to celebrate that with you. And so if you prayed that prayer, would you grab that card in the seat back pocket in front of you? You can go to it on your phone, or if you're online, you can go to restorationchurchsd.com/new, or you just fill it out and check that box that said, I started following Jesus. Let us know so we can pray for you, celebrate, and follow up with you. But let's just applaud that God is moving in our space. And again, if that was something that you needed today, we would love to connect with you. We would love to pray for you. There's nothing magical about it. It's just a sense of we want to connect with you in this really special moment. So some of our pastors and our elders and prayer team will be over this way, and if you're in the building by the cross. And if you would love prayer during this last song of worship, we would love to invite you to just go over there and let them speak the name of Jesus into your life. It could be that you decided to follow him today, or it could be that you just have something in your life that you need prayer for, unrelated. Or perhaps you need prayer for the courage to take a chance on someone this week, someone in your neighborhood or at your work or in your family. We'd love to pray for you in that. So take advantage of that if you'd like. We're going to close our gathering by singing together. I invite you to stand if you're able as we sing this last song about the reality that God is closer to us than we even think.